Perfect. Karina, thank you so much for joining me.
Very excited. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, well, look, I'll start with just saying I've been following your work for a long time. The thing I love about your work is it has a level of character and narrative that is intimate. It's at the small scale. It really feels like you know the soul and the character of the project. And on the side of that, we're obviously both huge fans of Studio Ghibli.
Absolutely.
But from what I understand, you actually did live in Japan. So your inspirations and that kind of Japanese language comes into your drawings, and I think everyone can see it's really, really a genuine, beautiful drawing that you end up doing. What I'd love to kind of start with is just before we get into that, could you tell people a little bit about your background, where you studied, perhaps what you're doing at the moment?
Yeah, sure. First of all, thank you for a very kind introduction. I'm very, very flattered. And yes, so I graduated from Glasgow School of Art, which is in Scotland, and I did their full degree, bachelor and diploma of architecture as well. And as you mentioned, yes, I did live in Japan. So I went for half of my final year on exchange to Japan, where I could do the final thesis of architecture. So my work was very influenced by Japan, but also prior my visit and time living in Japan, I was very, very much influenced by this culture. And obviously, as Studio Ghibli, and I'm gonna talk a little bit about that during the presentation. And that's 100% a big influence. I graduated in July 2020, and currently I'm a freelancer, and I'm working on several live build projects as well, looking into circular economy and those concepts which I will slightly touch in this presentation. I'm trying to sort of see how to investigate those in a real life. Yes, so that's me.
That's amazing. If you're ready, we can start your presentation.
Yeah.
And then we can start to talk about your process.
Okay, so actually I call those illustrated designs because I can't call myself an illustrator. I did a degree in a different field, but also I feel that I'm not using some 100% illustration techniques, and that's why I prefer to call those illustrated designs, because also a lot of design involved in those. Yeah, I'm doing architecture. I was thinking I will talk about those two interventions, you could call them, I guess.
For sure. I just want to quickly say as well, just so you know, and just so we can clarify to the audience watching as well, is the whole point of this session is to be able to, one, kind of reveal the process behind your beautiful work, but also just to give people an insight and perhaps tips and to kind of give them a deeper understanding of what goes on in your head when you're coming up with these design ideas and all the details that are kind of within these really complex compositions.
Yeah, when I thought about this podcast, our session, so I decided actually to run through the process when these ideas first appeared to me, and then how I started integrating them into the university designs, and how I failed. So I will show those, because it was like total nonsense how my brain worked, and then how finally the aha moment happened. So there will be a little bit about actually how I designed them, because the technique is very simple, but it's not about the technique, it's about this process. So I will actually take some time explaining the story behind those, which I think is
perfect.
It's maybe more interesting than the actual process. Yes, why did I choose those images to present here? So the one on the right side is this bicycle station, but in reality, it's not a bicycle station. It was some Kyoto impressions, I call it, some collections of components or patterns which I observed in Kyoto. So this was very first intervention which I designed when I was in Japan, and when I finally realized, I got it, like something I was trying so hard to design, and finally I can see, like, not conceptually but visually, physically, that it's coming there. It's coming it's on the right path. So it was a really, actually, maybe a 2-year process before I came to something where I realized that I'm a little bit satisfied with the result, at least, you
Amazing.
know.
So
So
this drawing
we'll,
actually here, just sorry to interrupt, but so this exploration, it started by you trying to find the components and certain elements or even symbols in some ways that represented the character, the narrative of the place, and you just started to kind of experiment with the composition of these things in 3D, right?
Yes, absolutely. So I think I will jump to something else, which is part one, which is Vietnam, and that's where the story started. So I have never been to any of Asian countries before the part one placement, and I was somehow really attracted and really wanted to explore this part of the world. And I thought, okay, part one is the perfect time, to go there and work there, not just as a tourist, but to have a full living experience there, because it's very, very different. So, and there two images comes, and it's all about colorful juxtaposition. It's about very sometimes ridiculous, very overcomplicated urban conditions, and I was so amazed by those and so much inspired. I just couldn't understand what is so attractive about those. And as you said at the beginning, that there is something on a small scale, something humane, something which everyone can recognize, because in those urban conditions you can really understand what the activities are happening, what people are doing. You can see a lot of humane level architecture, even in a large city complex, large scale buildings. You can see a lot of pockets of activities and a lot of do-it-yourself elements, which actually is the most important part of it. So self-built architecture is happening here. And when I was in Vietnam, I was just drawing those facades, so I couldn't proceed like from theoretical or maybe conceptual side. What is so much attracted me, but I was just recording those back in Vietnam, in Hanoi particularly. So, and then I came across of drawings by Mateusz Urbanowicz, who has this very famous series of Tokyo storefronts facades, and then yeah, I looked at them and I was thinking, okay, that's something what he's recording, that's similar thing which I was going around Hanoi and recording also, like some little facades. And later I came up with like a tiny sort of collection of postcards where I recorded this overcomplicated situation, so to say. I think that was the first step, which led me to next part of the story, where I came
Sorry,
back to the UK. Yeah.
sorry, just in the last two slides. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
I just want to say this, the thing about I think the thing I love about this is precedent you showed with Matthias with his drawings. One of the things I like to emphasize in this series, and one of the reasons I love having people like you on, is because you guys are practicing this notion of recording your thoughts and kind of exploring your ideas through drawing. I think a lot of the hesitation that some students have is in the process, in the conceptual stages of their project, they have ideas, they're drowning in ideas, but the way they record their ideas is sometimes through a quick note in the diary, or sometimes they try to do it with kind of photographs and explain it to their tutor. But there's a beautiful kind of thing of going and actually recording your thoughts through a drawing and making an archive of your ideas through a drawing, which is an indication of what you're doing here, right?
Yes, absolutely. And if I am in a position to sort of not give an advice, but just from my own experience, I would say switch off your brain. Don't think about how you will implement it into your design or your studio design. Just forget about it. You need to kind of breathe, let yourself a little bit, some inner freedom, and just look what is attracting you without trying to understand it. Just like visually record it. Yeah. And then through the process you will understand what's happening with you. So I guess this year out for me, I mean, that was really a very special moment when I completely I realized, not only from those illustrations which I'm drawing now, but more from my career perspective. It changed my perspective to what I want to do in life as well. So this may be for some looks like some couple of sketches, but it was a huge step, my personal huge step towards something completely different. So if I again like switch your like switch your brain off, and then maybe you need to put yourself in a completely different context, something very extreme, and then that's where all the ideas coming from, and then something you didn't expect from yourself. So where I came back to the UK, so after year out, the fourth, fifth year were coming, and I I just almost failed my fourth year project. I mean, not failed. I got like C. But for me as an A student, I was very upset. And then and also that's what I tell everyone, like, forget about grades. Nobody ever asks you for grades, so don't think about it. What is more important at university is actually experiment. And even you will like don't aim to tick all the boxes and for a higher grade, because that's the moment you have an excuse to do whatever you want at university. You probably won't have this full time to experiment and to do models, drawings, and have those deadlines to present your final project. So please, if you're at the university now, don't be afraid to maybe not to maybe even fail.
Yeah.
Who cares?
I love this. I love what you're saying here, because I have a very similar journey in that in my fourth year. I completely just said, okay, I'm going to choose something out of my comfort zone, and I don't care about my grade, because luckily when we're ungraded in our fourth year, we're graded, but the grade doesn't count. And so I just went all out of my comfort zone and tried to make, fantastic drawings. But I want to ask you, what you're showing me here, is this the project that you didn't get your top grade in?
No, I remember, but I mean, this is like a concept. This is not even for final design. I will show later what was like the output. It was like one of the first interim reviews, and I remember presenting this image. The tutor was just like covering but I will tell you something. The context was Glasgow. It's like it's completely out of context. It's like doesn't make any sense. I was just so inspired by Hanoi that I came from Hanoi and back to Glasgow, and I couldn't get it out of my mind, but also I couldn't figure out how to, this challenge of taking ideas from one context and implementing it to Western culture. This just didn't work, and I'm still struggling, to be honest. But it didn't make any sense. But I was like, okay, no, but I want to present those pockets of activities and those like juxtaposed elements, but I don't know how to make them work in Glasgow. And this is like sort of the section where I was, trying to kind of work with this. In Hanoi, for instance, all the activities happening vertically, where in Western context everything is happening horizontally, kind of on a ground floor. You can still see some shop fronts, but that's it. If it's a private house, you don't see anything. But yes, in Hanoi the situation is completely different. You can have house in the middle, like somebody's private residence in the middle of this building, but then on the top floor, like in the middle, there is some shop, and then restaurant, and then something else going on, and the workshop. So completely different way of don't know how to say it, what's the term to use for that, but completely different way of arranging those activities. And then
Also, just quickly with the actual drawing, because I'm loving the kind of variation in the drawing kind of mediums you're showing. So if you go back a couple slides, and you go from these sketches, these are inspiring kind of your narrative, and you're kind of you're recording the vernacular of Vietnamese street architecture. And then as you start to move on, I love what you're saying here, because I recognize this difficult move where you've recorded the concepts, you've got the intangible kind of concept in your head, but then you try to make, the tutor will say to you, okay, now you need to make some architecture, or now you need to make this real, or whatever. And that process is always a very difficult process in a lot of people's, for me as well, So did you start to model these things in perhaps SketchUp, or what software are you
Yeah.
using, and how did you find that
Uh,
process?
so yes, I actually used to I used a lot of Revit, but when I started experimenting with those complex urban situations, so to say, I chose SketchUp because it's just easier. I don't think I can model anything like that in any other software. I use SketchUp here, and SketchUp is so simple to use. But what is more, it's not just the software. Here again, you need to switch off your design brain. You have to forget everything what you learned before, even practicality. I know it's like maybe a strange advice to give, but really that what works for me. I was very practical, very practical. I came from architectural technology background and from school which was physical mathematical direction. So something happened, but I was always sort of putting those boundaries to myself because I was sort of thinking, oh, that's the right way, but there is no right way. And then not only software but also the way you think, you have to switch it. And what happens, don't be afraid. Yes, this will be a fail, but through this fail you will learn the most, because you will explore some different type of thinking, different conceptual approach, and from that later this aha moment will happen. So this was SketchUp and Photoshop. This is what I still use, but that's why I'm saying, and when I also teach in the tutorials, what I really emphasize, you can use the same technique but never come up with maybe similar designs or similar output, even in illustration sense, because this is much more about the design you're making than the actual software. The software, and even when you open Photoshop, there are like a couple of things I'm using to create those designs which I'm doing now. So that's very basic. So yes, I you can see the context of Glasgow, and then this is something I propose. Like I can't believe, but I am sort of even proud of it. It's a bad project from like how could you like learn
From your
from
tutor's
free
perspective,
from tutor's
but I'll
perspective.
be
Yeah.
honest with you. I know a studio that I in Westminster, that if you presented this project, they probably would have absolutely adored it. So I think there's something to say here as well about the fact that you had confidence to just stick with your idea and stick with your project. And yeah, there's no doubt that you're an incredibly talented, architectural designer. It's just, this is a difficulty I think a lot of students have, is how do I please my tutor, or how do I really hit the brief in the perfect way, yet my ideas and my passion is somewhere else. But you obviously went on that journey, and it looks like you ended up with amazing work.
Yeah, that's. I guess I wasn't very confident. I remember presenting it, and I think it was the most stressful review, because also I couldn't. I didn't have enough of, neither confidence or reasons to explain why I designed something like that, because it was out of context. And yeah, I I was very stressed. But for me, like I had a and I still have a friend who I actually collaborate now on full time together, and on our something which going to happen soon, hopefully. But yes, I had a friend who was in a similar position, and she really gave me this confidence to do something like that. So I guess your surroundings matter a lot, because tutors are different, and then that's also people. That's just people who are maybe a little bit more experienced than us, but they have their opinion, which you shouldn't be like the main how do I put it correctly? Well, like if you want to do something, you have these 5 years at university, is it your main aim to get an A and please all the tutors, and then you will never find your sort of architectural voice? Or you spend this time really experimenting and, yes, maybe one time fail, repeat this year. Well, that's fine. But at least you will find something which is
That
very important for you.
that's amazing, amazing advice. I would emphasize that as well. I like the way you put it. That you know, you have sometimes, you have this option where, like, okay, I could do everything by the book. I can try to, listen to exactly what the tutor wants, the brief wants, and this and that, and that's great. I think a lot of people do that and excel. But there's a different type of person. Maybe you and I fall into this category where you have, you have your own set desires and passion when it comes to design process, comes to design inspiration, and you have a very clear idea of where you want to push things. Now, obviously, you have to respect people with more experience than you, your teachers, and you try to find that balance. But at the same time, I completely agree with you that university is the place where you experiment. And we're looking right
Mhm.
now at, I think, quite a very, interesting experiment.
Yes, so this was like the third attempt, I call it, and then yeah, that's sort of where it's ended. Well, I had another project on fourth year, where I lost my confidence after I got like the low grade for this project, and I was thinking, okay, maybe this is something wrong, and I will try to do something else. So for my fourth project, I was experimenting with something else, but I actually had to put it here, at least one drawing. But anyway, that was something about mechanics. And you will see what is my project now is combination of those juxtaposed elements and some mechanical sort of structures, not or mechanisms, yeah.
Yeah.
And so that was like my fourth year was a horrible year in terms of design output, but it was a uh, great experimental year, a great foundation for me to move forward. If I wouldn't do that on fourth year, probably in fifth year, I would. Yeah, I don't know what would I design then, and would this whatever wherever I'm now, would it all happen that way? So part two is Japan, and where I went to Kyoto. And what was easier, obviously, because I had to design in Kyoto context, and that was like all the ideas already I could implement in the right context. So I was observing Kyoto. Kyoto is very different from Tokyo. Kyoto is a historic capital of Japan. So you could see a lot of still remaining the vernacular architecture there, but also uh, I was very much attracted to the rooftop urbanism and those little adjustment structures which been designed or built, self-built by the user of the house. So you could see there is maybe the house which been designed by a master builder. Actually in Japan historically there were no architects, there were carpenters, yeah. So designed by a master builder, but then in years the user started to attaching some structures which according to his needs he would design and build himself. So I was recording those components sort of in a booklet, analyzing those, uh, yeah, and then came up with whatever I have, like those designs which you see now. And that's why they are on this humane level, and where probably everyone can recognize them. Like they see those and they think, oh, that looks like in my room, or like, oh, that's that's something, yeah, that's the mess I left in my room yesterday. Like they can maybe see themselves in those illustrations, or that's a bicycle similar to my bicycle, and this coffee, like I was getting this takeaway coffee from the coffee shop yesterday. Some moments of life happening in there. So that's what I was very attracted as well. Right. So I think I will jump into from conceptual to visual inspirations. And obviously, when I was in Japan, I was exploring the traditional Japanese wood prints, and those are the 20th century Shinhanga, the art movement prints. Uh, and then I was looking in the process, the what is interesting about those paintings is there are three professions involved: the carpenter, the painter, and the somebody who is printmaker. So three people involved in the process of one painting. So first, the painter, he prepares actually the what it will look like, and then the carpenter will carve all those layers, which will later the printmaker will paint and print in some sequence on the paper. And so I learned a lot from those in terms of the lines and colors, the softness of colors and the texture. Um, yes, I just can't stop looking at at the beauty of those.
It is
And
incredible, yeah.
mm, and even like the way they draw trees and yeah, every little shadow. And I hope in the future I have a chance to try, maybe not with wood but at least with leather, to try some tiny prints to make. And when it comes to those overcomplicated and maybe the mechanisms which doesn't make any sense, in fact, in most of my illustrations, they are not there for some invention or for some benefit to the to the architecture. They're there just because I'm attracted to to those mechanics, that's it, to those kinetical structures. And I want to actually explain. I was thinking why I'm so attracted to those. Is because everything now is digital. You take your phone, you can't really take it apart, understand how it works. But here is something very tangible, very visible, very understandable, and it drives your curiosity towards, oh, how this, like, okay, if this wheel is turning, then it comes here, so you can understand all the process of that structure, how it moves. And why particularly I chose the illustration by Heath Robinson, because his yeah, those are absurd and those are ridiculous in many ways, but they are so attractive. And yes, um and very, very interesting. And a little bit more about some visual inspirations, then I am very inspired by many contemporary illustrators. One of them is Harriet Lee Murrian and Bill Morden. He is particularly inspired by Ghibli studio, so he got a very, very beautiful illustrations, which are, I think, very much influenced by traditional wood prints, Japanese wood prints. And then, like, I guess when it comes to media, I also started experimenting with physical model making. And especially now when universities are closed and all the students have to study, unfortunately, from home, and this ability to go to the workshop is not an option anymore. But like, looking at this model been done from scrap material. So find whatever you have at home and experiment with those. Like, I think it's even more beneficial than those beautiful laser cut models, because laser cut models, I mean, yes, that's cool to make, but it loses the sense of exploring something through model making, because essentially the sense of model making is through, again, these tangible activities. You attach one piece, you explore the space, you see the shadow from this space, you combine several materials, several textures, and see how they work together. So after I came to Japan, I was just actually sitting at my desk and looking at different material what I have. I used something from The downpipe, I think, is the straw from takeaway Starbucks coffee, like cold coffee from Tesco's. And oh, this little flag here is from cookies, again from Tesco's. So, yes, I guess it's just opening your mind and using everything what is around you to implement it into your designs. Um, Together with what I was talking about, tangible experiences through overcomplicated mechanisms or kinetic structures, I was very much attracted to some drawings of first industrial revolution, like some inventions. And again, just visually, I don't know how those works, but I am just so, it just drives me very, very crazy. And that's something I tried to implement. I think the other project, which I'm ashamed to show from my fourth year, the roof was moving there. I guess yes, it's I don't understand how I could design that, but you know, you go through that, and finally you will come up with something which makes sense, but also you get satisfied with your design. And obviously, studio. Oh no, there is a spelling mistake. I'm so sorry. But I remember before I went to Japan, I maybe watched 20 times Laputa Castle in the Sky, the first moments of the film, where the mechanisms of like some magical flying machines were shown. So, and I even took sketches from those. And again, it's same as Hanoi. I was so much attracted to like visually, but I couldn't understand how can I apply it in architectural sense. I just had this like the sketchbook recorded with those moments, and I implement them, but not maybe in a straightforward sense. So yeah, the way I designed this is again switching my mind a little bit from what I used to have, this very practical approach, and combining a lot of components which I observed in Hanoi or in Ghibli movie or in Kyoto, or maybe around in in the room in my home. And then I just combine those in SketchUp, and I have the line drawing, and then I work with that in Photoshop. So the technique is very simple, but I guess it's very important to find your your style, your sense, your reason for that. And for me, it's very because I'm exploring something which is do-it-yourself architecture, which is community architecture, which is not very so-called elite approach to the architecture profession, life-built environment. So it led me, like, don't be afraid to be very much attracted to something visually, because it will lead you to something which makes sense in your architecture practice.
There's so many similarities in our interests, our passions, especially with the adaptable mechanisms, with looking at street vernacular and looking at how you can adapt that to this high tech kind of this high tech design language. Especially you think of almost village like vernacular designs that you've explored, and then trying to match that with its you're not just juxtaposing colors as you mentioned earlier, but you're also juxtaposing technology. You have the complete manual kind of the complete manual technology that comes with village type architecture, and then you bring in this hyper industrial design language that suddenly you have this incredible contrast that I think anyone, designer or not, would look at that and be visually intrigued. So I love looking at this because I'm really passionate about the same things. I think it's really interesting to see you go down this route of modeling components in SketchUp. Again, I've done something similar, but I love the way you've done it because there's a level of humbleness, humility, shall I say, I think, in the way you've set up this composition. It's not trying to show off any crazy architectural show off, showpiece designs or parametric craziness. You are showing kind of the charm of life, the complexity of life. And I think that's what kind of makes your drawing so attractive. as well. So that's just the point I wanted to make quickly. Um, how do you feel about that idea of bringing in this kind of complexity of life?
Yes, I feel that it's really about observation. Observation of what I've seen in Hanoi and Kyoto. Essentially, because we live in a world where there is both vernacular exists, but high tech is at the same time happening here. And Kyoto is very good example in that sense, because you could walk along the street and there is this traditional machiya house standing, and next to this machiya house there is the movable parking space, so where you could see the mechanics of how the cars move. So it's like several floors of the parking, but then the cars are moving there on, like, according to this to this very huge and complex not actually complex, very simple mechanism, but like complex from the sense that they're lifting the cars. And then, yeah, next to that, it's a high rise, standing, something which been built maybe last year. So I was just observing those, and I was attracted to those. And then I thought, okay, I will just draw those. But
Definitely.
you could see the story, the narrative which I showed, like it didn't happen in one moment,
Yeah.
when it finally made sense to myself as well.
I think you and I could probably do a whole podcast session just on the charm of adaptable mechanisms. I think because
Absolutely.
I'm obsessed with it the same way you are. I used Heath Robinson in my projects, but just to quickly say, I think we're sort of 5 or 10 minutes over, so it'd be good to kind of go through the drawings if you have more drawings to show. But I wanted to emphasize something that I'm noticing from your work as well, to perhaps people who are looking for some advice or tips. And it's that it's on this notion of not trying to do something stand out architecturally, but be having a unique or standout project can come in many different forms. And what you've done here is essentially an interior composition, the complexity of like an isometric view into a house. And again, I keep saying this, but I've explored something similar, and I love seeing the way you've done it. The unique elements, the USP, if you like, of your work is something which is to do with detail and composition. And I think it's a lesson for students as well to know that you don't have to go out and do the most craziest shape or the most insane material combinations. Sometimes just looking at how your passion manifests into, complex life could be the unique aspect of your project, don't you think?
Absolutely. And I think it just, as simple as that, it's very, if you explore something, if you go in out of your comfort zone and explore something which was essentially very complicated for me, and I guess for you as well, and try to explore it on like that close, like one centimeter from your face scale, like that should be like really the joinery between this beam and that column, or like this staircase and that beam, very very tiny scale. Start from that, like almost furniture design. That how I started it, like from a tiny scale, as you said, like interior. Once you got a hang of that, you can scale up your design, because essentially what was in fourth year, it was a big district design, and I couldn't do it on that scale. Yeah, I'm almost there. I was just about to say, because I know that the color is sort of what is also maybe attractive in my work. So the color, I don't know, like I didn't know how to work with color before, but I just learn again for different graphics. I'm just observing, something on in galleries, or even in Pinterest or in somebody's Instagram. So I am also learning from others. So that's as simple as that, and a lot of experimentation with textures and lines and even words in your work. So just spend your time, if you enjoy graphics, just spend your time exploring those and decorate your drawings. Yeah, I know that at university they can say, "Oh, your design matters. Don't like over decorate your drawings." Yeah, that's absolutely right. You're a designer. Think about the space you design, but don't be afraid to spend extra time if you enjoy it. Because I enjoyed it. That's the most important. If you enjoy that, or maybe you enjoy model making, explore this media like 100%. Spend 20 hours. Don't sleep. Explore, and then just some elements I created to kind of give identity to my work, but also there are some Ghibli elements to that.
And
And
sorry, just before we get into that, quickly into the slide before this, if we were to very quickly in a basic way break this drawing down into kind of specific elements, could you kind of explain the components of making this drawing, even until the decoration?
Yes. So something which is outlined here is a decoration which I did in Photoshop, but the rest is modeled fully in SketchUp, and then you just export it to, and you can like, it depends. Some people feel more comfortable to work in Illustrator. Some people more comfortable in Photoshop. I'm sort of Photoshop person, so I then decorate my drawing in Photoshop. And modeling in SketchUp SketchUp is such a simple program, and if you need something like more complicated, you can always get it from 3D warehouse like plants, or you can draw them in Photoshop or on your on iPad. Maybe you export it and then you work in Procreate on your drawing. So there are different ways, and all of them are totally, I guess, will lead you to similar results if you wish. But again, it's about design. You can export something like a high rise and then post production in Photoshop. It will be totally different outputs.
And just quickly with those characters, are you designing? Did you kind of come up with those characters on your own? Are they hand drawn? Did you get them from somewhere?
Yes, where I was back at university, I used to download some characters and just when you finish your design, you just decorate. That's a normal practice, and in architecture we don't really draw, or most of us don't draw maybe characters. But then when I started Instagram, I later thought that I would need to draw everything myself, and I then really enjoyed that, and I sort of created my own library of those characters. And I just look into some minimalist fashion images on Google, and I get inspiration from those for people. And you can even trace photos from your own library, and then yes, look into some minimalist fashion, and then combine those and draw that. So I drew those on drawing pad, in Photoshop. Yeah.
Amazing.
But there are different ways. Yeah, there are like so many little techniques which you can use to kind of get different but also similar results.
Amazing. We'll come on to your final slide, hopefully, to kind of talk about what your classes and everything in a second. But is this your final slide?
Yeah, that's
Perfect.
it. Yeah.
Well, look, there's so many amazing things I think I've got from your presentation. I mean, I think people could easily re-listen to that and definitely take notes to get some tips to look at all sorts of different drawing representation examples. And also just general tips for coping in architecture school. But to anyone who is kind of exploring, they've accepted that actually you're right. I want to explore the boundaries of my imagination. I want to be free in architecture school, at least for 1 year. What would you advise them, and how would you kind of, if there was something you could do differently, what would you have done? Or perhaps there's a piece of advice that you wish you knew before, and you can share with people maybe in a similar position.
I guess like all of us, and even though I said it's right thing to be attracted to visual inspiration, so you find, and I was in that position like many times, you find something on Pinterest, on Instagram, on ArcDaily, the zine, doesn't matter where, in a book, hopefully. So you just get so much attracted, that you miss the conceptual side, the thought behind it. I mean, maybe it's like a very straightforward advice, but behind actually all this work has been a lot of theoretical, a lot of reading done. So I guess to truly find your way, you need to really understand your architectural position, and yes, your reason behind those designs, because otherwise it it will be an illustration. And I guess as an architect or architectural student, you need to understand that position, and in the end explain it mainly to yourself, because this will lead you to maybe eventually to choose the correct path in your career as well, and in your future choices of what you want to build and what sort of architect you want to be as well. So that would be probably, yeah, the main advice.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And yeah,
Thank you.
is there anything you want to kind of share with perhaps what you're doing at the moment? Is there anything sort of with your practice or anything you want to share where people can find your work as well?
Yes, so I have my website, which called same as my Instagram, and my Instagram is Karina Armanda, and my website is also Karina Armanda. So that's basically, yeah, the main sources of information about myself, and I am hopefully in June I can share more work behind the scenes and what I'm working at the moment, but right now it's all, yeah, working in progress. And well, whoever is interested to join the illustration tutorial, where I talk more about the process, and actually I talk much deeper about the thesis which I did in Kyoto. So I explain a lot of processes behind the design there in much more depth. And yes, again, like I explained some basic steps of how I create illustrations, but there are so many tiny tips which I give on those tutorials, which make a huge difference. So whoever is interested, welcome to join those as well.
And where can they find the information for that?
So they can just DM me on Instagram, and I share all the information there.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
If you stop sharing your screen, sorry, unless you wanted to talk about that. Is that?
No, that's just thank you. I just write. I just like the Japanese. They're just so visually satisfying.
Great, so we can see you now. Okay, so one of the things I want to quickly ask you about as well is, we're obviously both on Instagram. We're both consistent illustrators, if you like, on Instagram. However, one of the things you just said was, when I asked you about giving advice to students, you said that, you think about the reasons and the logic behind your drawings and your project as well, because otherwise you'll just be doing illustrations. One of the problems, or one of the blessings that we see is that Instagram has become now a very, very popular place for people to put their work, their illustrations. However, it's often not the case that people will get the logic, the reasoning, the basis, the concept behind your drawings. The main reason people have a strong Instagram page, in my opinion, is because it's visually appealing. It's just visually amazing to see. So I just wonder, how do you kind of, because I'm constantly kind of thinking about this, is it okay to produce drawings specifically as illustrations that don't have much of a kind of conceptual basis, not just for Instagram, but also for your design process in your studio? Because, arguably in your conceptual stage, you're coming up with design ideas and you're coming up with artistic ideas, yet you don't have a solid concept. So what's your thoughts on the kind of the popularization of Instagram as a strictly visual platform, and how that's going to affect architecture education and architecture students?
I guess maybe it's just my view on that, but I think it won't be as attractive. At least for me, it wouldn't be what it is if I wouldn't go through the reasoning. Like only when I got the reason, I jumped to what got very popular on my Instagram. So obviously, as you're running as the aware Instagrammers, then you can't produce these designs every time you post an image. So it's totally fine from that point of view. But for students, I would say be careful with not getting into this total like visual representation is not the yeah, like it comes in a parallel, but you have to be strong in both in that sense.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think this is the reason I try to also emphasize the idea of thinking through drawing, because if your thoughts come first and then your drawings come later, then you're not in a position to post rationalize something you've just done because it looks pretty. So, that's something I've definitely seen through your work. It was super inspiring to see your process, to see the depth in which you think. But I think the most inspiring thing I got from speaking to you was being okay with embracing your mistakes or your so-called failures and seeing how that can evolve and become something really beautiful.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. Don't be afraid.
So,
yes.
so
thank you so much.
No, thank you.
It was a very lovely conversation. Thank you.
Really appreciate that.